Okay, great. So now we are recording. Welcome to Financial Aid 101. This is just the tip of the iceberg to give you some general info about what you need to know as you start planning for college pathways and the costs of various educational plans. Okay, let me move this. So I don't know if you all can see it, but I will move it. So by the end of this presentation, you will know the types of financial aid, the meaning of all these acronyms that you start to hear when you hear people talk about financial aid, like COA, EFC, SAR, FAFSA, which is called the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and also how to complete the CSS Profile, which is another financial aid application that a lot of private schools also use in addition to the FAFSA. I'm going to move this up here so I can see some of you. Okay. So these are, oh, we got ahead of ourselves. Okay, so when people think about financial aid, they usually think about the free money you get, grants and scholarships, right? And they're great. There's lots of grants available to our students. There's federal grants, that's money that the federal government gives students to pay for college that they don't have to give back. The Pell Grant is the main one. This year it's $6,495 per year. The state of Oregon also has some grants, the Oregon Opportunity Grant this year to go to a four-year school, that's $3,600 on top of the Pell, a little less for a community college. And then the state of Oregon also has what's called the Oregon Promise Grant, which is a grant to help make community college affordable for all Oregon students. Then of course there's scholarships. Scholarships, again, are money that scholarship organizations or colleges will give you that you do not have to pay back to help you pay for your education. Most students and parents don't think of loans as also included in financial aid. So they are. And so when you hear a college say that 98% of their students receive financial aid, what that means to most families is they're thinking, wow, that school is giving 98% of their students grants and scholarships. When in reality, maybe 50% are getting grants and scholarships, and the other financial aid students are getting to reach that 98% are loans. So it's good to start thinking about that this time of year when I'm meeting with seniors and they're looking at their financial aid awards. Loans are bundled right in there with grants and scholarships, and often it's hard for families to tease them out. So there's two kinds of aid. There's need-based aid based on a family and a student's financial resources, and then there's non-need-based aid. So need-based aid, like I said, is based on a family's finances. And so grants like the Federal Pell Grant, the Oregon Opportunity Grant are need-based aid. Work study is another form of aid that colleges give that is also usually need-based. And work study is when students will be awarded in their financial aid package a certain amount of money for work study. And what it means is they can go find a job on campus where they can get paid through federal or institutional funds for that job. Another kind of need-based aid are subsidized loans. So students are either offered when they get their financial aid awards, subsidized loans, or you can see on the non-need-based aid, unsubsidized loans. And we talk about a lot of this senior year in our college and career readiness classes, but subsidized loans are better because they don't start accruing interest until you graduate from college, where unsubsidized loans start accruing interest as soon as you take them. And then non-need-based aid is aid that are based on merit. So like for the Oregon Promise, up until this past year, that's the grant for Oregon community colleges, there was no economic or financial cap for families. Any family in Oregon whose student had a 2.5 GPA or above, they got up to $3,700 to attend a community college in Oregon. Last year, for the first time, they did put a financial cap, relatively high. Like for a family of four, you had to be making over $120,000 a year. But Normally, the Oregon Promise is not a need-based grant. It's based on merit and having a GPA above a 2.5 and wanting to go to an Oregon community college. Same with many scholarships. Some do look at financial need, but most scholarships are based on merit, whether it's academic, participation in athletics, theater, robotics, community service. Senior year, we talk a lot about all the scholarships available to Ashland students, and there is definitely something for everyone. And then at the bottom of that, again, is what I mentioned, is that unsubsidized loan that the federal government can offer students. So these two loans are up to $5,500 in student loans that freshmen can take out. That's the maximum amount of loans a 18-year-old freshman going into college is allowed to take out. So cost of attendance. One of the first things to think about when you're thinking about schools you're applying to is what is the cost of attendance at these schools. So it's more than just tuition. Like students will say, oh, the tuition at U of O is $14,000. My family can afford that. But the cost of housing at U of O is even more than the cost of tuition. And so really kind of teasing those out. So these are what are called direct costs. Those are costs that you pay directly to the college, like tuition fees, housing, meal plan. Of course, all these things can vary, right? Depending on what kind of housing you want. If you want a single room, it's going to cost a lot more than if you want a room with 4 other people. Or if you want the biggest meal plan where you can eat as much as you want at any hour of the day, that's going to cost more than a smaller meal plan. So same with indirect costs. Those can really vary. Do you buy all new books or do you rent your books? Personal expenses. Do you have really expensive tastes in terms of clothes and entertainment? Do you have a car that you have to fuel with gas all the time? So in the college handbook, the AHS college handbook, which I don't know if any of you have yet, and I could put it in the chat at the end of this, the PDF, there's a student budget page for all of the schools in Oregon, public and private, community college through the 4-year privates. So you start to get an idea of the average cost of tuition and fees and housing. And again, those are averages, right? So when you look at travel costs for a school, they're looking at kids that are coming maybe from all over the country. So if you go to SOU, you're probably not going to be spending $2,000 on travel if you're a student who lives in the Rogue Valley. So it's important to kind of do your research and look at those to really get a sense of what the real cost of attendance will be for your student and your family. So I talked a little bit about this on the last slide, that these are estimates, and of course they can change, based on the number of credits you take and housing and meal plan choices you make. And again, like I said, do your research. So this is my plug for net price calculators. If you don't know them already, every college by law, this was done during the Obama administration, every college needs to have somewhere on its website what's called a net price calculator. The easiest way to find them is just to Google the name of the school net price calculator, and you'll usually find a link that will take you there. So what the net price calculator will do is ask you questions about your family's financial resources, your students' academics, students' GPA, maybe SAT or ACT scores, and they'll give you a pretty good idea of what it will cost for your student to go to that school. Now, yes, every once in a while, every school has full rides for, certain kids. Like Lewis and Clark is a really popular school for our kids. If you do the net price calculator for them and you're kind of a middle income family, you might not qualify for need-based aid from the federal government. They might say, we're going to give you probably an $18,000 to $25,000 merit aid, dean scholarship off the top. So really your cost is going to be about $50,000 a year. You might end up getting one of their 5 scholarships they give a year that covers all of tuition, which is great. We've had students get those, but it's a really good thing for a family to know that, hey, Lewis and Clark looks like it might be a really great fit academically, socially for my student. But financially, it might not be a great fit for our family unless you get that really great scholarship that covers all of tuition. And those are the kinds of conversations I really encourage students and their parents to be having, you know, if they haven't before, junior year and definitely senior year. And that's why this last bullet point at the bottom, understand your financial resources. I really encourage parents and students to talk about what college is going to cost, and parents to really give their students an idea of what they can afford to contribute each year to their education. So a lot of parents get uncomfortable with this and say, well, I don't really want to tell my student like how much we make a year or how in debt we are or, you know, what we've saved. And that's fine. A student really just has to have an idea of, if their parent says, hey, we've been saving for this, we can give $5,000 a year towards the cost of attendance for you for college, or we can give nothing, or 1,000. But it really will help the student as they're doing their research to get a really good sense of what schools are going to be a good financial fit for them, because the reality is our kids get into most of the schools they apply to. You know, those crapshoot Ivy League, Stanford kind of schools that are, we have lots of kids who deserve to be there, but there's so many other kids who apply who also deserve to be there. Our kids do and do not get into those schools. But the reality is our kids get into most of their top choice schools. And then the decision comes down to what is the best financial fit for their family. So it's a really important discussion that has really evolved over the 15 years I've been in this job. And so if anyone has questions about that, you know, wants to talk to me one-on-one, set up a Zoom appointment, you know, or even talk about it after we finish recording tonight, I'm happy to do that. And just another kind of caveat on that with having that discussion, I talk to a lot of kids who say, and I tell this to kids, like if your parents or your parents or your grandparents say, hey, we have a 529, we've got you covered, we've been saving, you just apply and we will figure it out. You say, thank you, I am so grateful. You know, I'm going to work hard on my applications, but I do have one question. Like, when you say you have me covered, do you mean like have me covered like $25,000 a year U of O have me covered, or $70,000 a year Reed have me covered? Because honestly, those are really big differences. And a lot of grandparents feel like, yeah, we've been saving and we want to help you, and that's awesome. But a kid needs to really have a good sense of what is going to be available to them. So in the spring of senior year, there's not a lot of dream killing happening, right? I tell parents, I don't want you to be the dream killers. I'm here to like give you this information now so that, not that I'm the dream killer, but that you're making realistic plans and doing your research. So nobody in the spring of senior year has to be the dream killer. And hopefully every kid applies to schools. I don't know if any of you came to the Finding a College that's a good fit, you know, looking for the academics, looking for the cultural, do I want big, small, urban, you know, all of those, plus the financial, you know, come into play. Okay, so what you've been waiting for, how do I get financial aid? So all financial aid revolves around the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. It's a completely online form now. Students and parents cannot fill it out until fall of senior year. It goes live October 1st. So nothing you need to worry about now, but to be aware of for the fall. In our CCR classes, our college and career readiness classes, I spend time with seniors in September. It's one of the first things we start with. I explain the FAFSA to them and how they will start to work to complete that, and then how they will involve their parents in getting that done. So what the FAFSA does is it collects both financial information from the family, and that's primarily the parents, right? Because most students, if they've had a summer job or a job, their resources, financial resources kind of pale in comparison, usually to what parent or parents have. And then it also collects demographic information about the student and the parent. So it wants to know the parents' ages and how close the parents are to retirement, how many other Dependents are in the household. How many of those dependents are close to college age? Are any parents in college? So basically FAFSA uses this formula, which is about 50 pages long and varies from year to year. And they take all this information that the students and parents enter in the FAFSA and spit out what's called your expected family contribution, or EFC, which I'm going to get into on the next slide. So any questions before I keep going on about what I've mentioned so far? No? We're all good? Okay. So right down here at the bottom of the screen, that's how do you apply. So there's no need to do this now because you'll probably just forget them. But every student who's completing a FAFSA has to get an FSA ID. And what the FSA ID is like your electronic signature. So I will have students get their FSA IDs in September when they're in their CCR classes. Then one parent also will need to get an FSA ID. So if a student lives with both parents that are married, both parents' financial information will appear on their FAFSA, but only one parent actually needs to be the parent who gets the FSA ID, and we'll use that to verify the student's FAFSA. And here's a plug. There's lots of, if you Google FAFSA, there's all sorts of FAFSA websites out there that are .com, that are information sites that will kind of maybe help you get to FAFSA, but whenever you're filling out the FAFSA, and that's why I love people to come to presentations in the fall to make sure everyone does things the right way. It's a free, you never need to pay to fill out the FAFSA. If you hear someone, this happens every year, a student or parent will say, we're really behind, it's September. Yeah, I heard that Amelia already filled out her FAFSA. I'm like, well, she might've done that, but it's the wrong one. She can't do it till October 1st. So everyone calm down. So there's just gets to be a lot of panic and misinformation come senior year when parents and kids start to freak out. So just remember, October 1st is the important date. You really can't do much before then. So more about what the FAFSA does, collects this demographic and financial information. And what it does then, like I said, is creates a student aid report, the SAR, that kind of summarizes all the information you enter into the FAFSA and then calculates that expected family contribution, or EFC, like I mentioned before. And the EFC, you'll hear over and over again, is not a dollar amount, even though you'll see colleges and websites refer to it as a dollar amount. It's a financial strength indicator. So if your EFC is 0, like all our students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, their EFC is 0. And it's super exciting when your EFC is 0, because that means you're going to get the full Pell Grant, that's $6,495, which will go up a little next year. You'll get the full Oregon Opportunity Grant if you stay at an Oregon school. But for other families whose EFC will vary, usually the cutoff for a Pell Grant is in the 5,000 range for an EFC. And then up above that, you're not necessarily a super high EFC. Like with the cutoff for the Oregon Promise last year was an EFC of 22,000, right? Which I said they kind of estimate a family of 4 with an income of say 120,000 might have an EFC of 22,000. So a lot of schools, it really depends on the schools, what they consider families with financial need really vary. So there are schools like the Ivy League schools and lots of schools with huge endowments like Case Western, which isn't an Ivy League school, but they have a huge endowment in Cleveland. And so if your family makes under $175,000 a year, they consider you to have significant need and they will cover all of your tuition. So if you can get into those schools, you could get a really great aid package, even though you don't qualify for federal aid, like a Pell Grant. So say, for an example, my sister-in-law, my niece and nephew grew up in Ashland, went to Willowin, went to the high school here, worked for the Shakespeare Festival. The older one went to Amherst, Ivy League type, no loan school. The younger one went to U of O Honors College. Both got great education Amherst is a 70 plus, now it's like an $80,000 a year school. It only costs their family about $5,000 a year to send him to Amherst because it's a no loan school, versus it costs a little more for them to send their daughter to U of O honors. So, you know, the whole financial piece really can vary depending on what kind of student you are, what kind of school you can get into, where it could actually be cheaper for you to go to one of these private schools if you can get in and if your family makes under what they consider a need-based situation. So any questions about that? Okay, so some students will ask, usually parents don't ask, can a student file a FAFSA without parent information? So the federal government, until a student is 24, even if the parent says, I am absolutely not contributing anything to my student's education, they want parent financial information on the FAFSA because they feel like parents should, if they can, potentially contribute. There are a number of ways parent information doesn't need to be on the FAFSA, and we have students every year here at Ashland High School who can file as what's called independents. Those are students who do not live with their parents. Those are students who have a legal guardian, who live with a grandparent but don't have a legal guardian, or who live with family friends. Students who have been in foster care and were not adopted until they were teenagers. So that might not apply to any of you, but students and parents, you might hear students that this does apply to. And so please, you know, send those students and families my way, because there's lots of money available for students who don't have a traditional kind of family situation, home life. And I want to make sure that those students get to file the FAFSA and know they can do that without parent information. Okay, this is another big question. How do you file the FAFSA with divorced or separated parents? So when a student's parents are divorced or separated, the student only has to have one parent's household on the FAFSA. And the rules for this are changing, but I don't think they're changing until the 2023 FAFSA. So I think all that is on here is going to hold true for next year's seniors. So what FAFSA wants is the parent that supports the student more than 50% of the time should be the parent on the FAFSA. So that doesn't mean the student who supports the student financially more than 50%. It's really who the student spends the most time with, custody-wise. And it doesn't even have to be the parent who has custody. That's also not an issue, or the parent who claims the student on their taxes, because I know some families kind of divide up the kids that way. So if this pertains to your family and you have questions about it, happy to answer them at the end, or if you have a question you want to kind of shout out now. But it's important to remember that if a parent has remarried, right, we're talking about the parent's household, that step parent in that household, their income is also included on the FAFSA. So that kind of catches a lot of families off guard. Another thing, a lot of our families end up having to weigh the students, since they're living in Ashland, parents both live here close by, students spend a lot of time at both parents' household. At that point, I suggest that parents use what's called the FAFSA forecaster to decide which families or which household income is going to be the lowest, so that the student will benefit from having the parent with the lowest income on their FAFSA. So the FAFSA forecaster is something you can Google. It's that last bullet point. It's on the FAFSA website, which will kind of, any parent can use it now too, just to kind of see, like, I wonder what my EFC is going to be, or what my daughter's EFC is going to be. So you can kind of play with that to see. We don't really need to go through getting an FSA ID right now. This is a little premature. But one thing to point out, that when you do get your FSA ID or you do work on the FAFSA, it's really important that both students and parents enter their name as it appears on their social security card. So a lot of students have hyphenated last names, but they're not hyphenated on their social security card, or they have a hyphenated name on their social security card, but they don't use it in real life, or they've used a nickname for so long they don't use the full name that's on their social security card, or they have a junior. All those things have to be like exactly accurate when you're doing an FSA ID or FAFSA, or the federal government will reject it. So just start thinking about that, keep it in there. I will remind you all again in the fall. Like I said, the FAFSA goes live October 1st, and you as well, those of you who are juniors who are going to be filling out the FAFSA next year as seniors, you're going to be filling out the 2022-2023 FAFSA, because that is when you will start college, is the fall of 2022, right? You're going to graduate in 2022 in June, and you'd start college in the fall. So if you hear of someone in September saying, hey, one of your peers or their parents saying, yeah, we already filled out the FAFSA, what they did is fill out the 21-22 FAFSA. Because when you go on to FAFSA in the fall, there will be two options of FAFSAs to fill out. The 21-22, which is for students who are going to college next fall, and the one you'll want to fill out, the 22-23. Okay. And then again, like I said, you always want to go to that .gov website to make sure you're not going to pay someone else to submit a form that should be free. Okay, and what you'll need to fill out the FAFSA, you're going to need the student's social security number, parents' social security numbers. If parents do not have social security numbers, there's other ways for students to fill out the FAFSA. If a student does not have a social security number, there are also other ways. So I just always encourage students when I'm giving this presentation to students in the fall to contact me, and then I can direct them to the specifics of how you do that. So again, like I said, well, first let's talk about list of schools. So when you fill out the FAFSA, one of the sections is school selection. So that's where the student enters the schools that they want the federal government to send their financial information to. So of course, in October, most students don't know all of the schools they want to apply to. I mean, some do. For some kids, this is a really easy process. Like their dream has been to go to OSU or U of O. They know their family can afford it. The school has their major. They visited. So no biggie. They put U of O on their FAFSA. They put RCC as a backup, or Lane Community College, just in case it ends up being too expensive, and they go on. So we encourage students to submit their FAFSA, as early as possible with all the schools they know they think they might want to apply to. Doesn't mean they have to apply to those schools if they put them on their FAFSA, but after a student's FAFSA is submitted, they can go back and make corrections and add schools later in the year. So that's not an issue. The financial information that parents will need. So the FAFSA, the 2022 FAFSA will use financial information from 2020, right? So we've already completed 2020, right? So adults are in the process of dealing with filing their 2020 taxes, and with COVID, things are kind of slowed down. So, but hopefully by next October, most senior parents will have completed their 2020 taxes. And if they have, when they do their FAFSA, they'll be given the opportunity to use the IRS data retrieval tool, which is awesome. In the olden days, like 5 years ago, parents had to go through their tax return and go line by line and enter in the numbers that FAFSA was asking for. Now you can link, using their FSA ID with the IRS. And then the IRS automatically populates the information from your tax returns, which is great because obviously schools say, well, that's from the IRS. The student didn't just type in some random numbers and their EFC is based on something that we have no idea is true. So we're going to request a lot of tax documents. So it really helps for families to use that IRS data retrieval tool so they can avoid their schools potentially asking them to scan a bunch of tax documents. Some schools will just ask for them anyway. It just happens randomly and they want more information, but the best start is to use that data retrieval tool if possible. If a student had a job in 2020, they might need their W-2s. Usually students don't have to file taxes because they don't make that much money, but they might need to enter how much they made. So any questions about that? Okay. Let's see, other FAFSA details. So a lot of students, when you finish the FAFSA and it spits out your EFC, usually happens right then unless there's some confusing things, and then they'll email you and you can log in and see what your EFC is. It will tell you if you're eligible for a Pell Grant or a partial Pell Grant. It will tell you if you're eligible for a subsidized loan or unsubsidized loan. So a lot of students think, oh, okay, so when am I going to find out how much money I'm getting for college? Like, well, that doesn't come from the federal government or FAFSA. What happens is FAFSA sends your financial information actually to the state of Oregon, to OSAC, the Oregon Office of Student Access and Completion. They then send your FAFSA information to the schools in Oregon that you've applied to, and actually FAFSA sends your FAFSA information to the schools all over the country that you've applied to. But in Oregon, OSAC is the clearinghouse for Oregon grants. And so your FAFSA information goes there, and it's one way I can tell who's completed a FAFSA successfully and then tell them, hey, your FAFSA was rejected. I know this because I get this data from the state, so we need to log back in and see what you did wrong. So like I said, after students submit the FAFSA, they can still go back in and add colleges. But one nice thing about getting the FAFSA done early is students have an idea of what their EFC is. Then they can start focusing more on their college applications and scholarship applications. Scholarship season really gears up in November and December. So it's really great if families can help their students get the FAFSA done sooner than later. It doesn't have to happen on October 1st. There's no big rush to do that. But it's nice if it can be done before November. So any questions about that? The last bullet on there is a note about the selective service question on the FAFSA. So students who identify as female will never see this question, but when FAFSA, it asks for a student's gender, and FAFSA hasn't caught up with a lot of other organizations, but they give two choices. They give male or female, and they direct you to put what is on your birth certificate. So if a student clicks female, they don't see this question. If a student clicks male, they will see the question, have you registered for the selective service? And I go through this with all the seniors when we do this in class. I explain what the selective service is. And for those of you who are here, I know we've got a couple students who might not know, the selective service is an organization affiliated with the military in this country. When we had a draft, like in the Vietnam War, people were drafted into the military from the selective service. So you register for the selective service, and then they had a lottery and they pulled names out of the selective service. And then those students, those people selected were told, hey, okay, you need to, sign up for the military and go to war. We haven't had a draft for over 50 years. We do still have a selective service administration. It is a law in this country that all males at the age of 18 need to register for the selective service. Supposedly there's a fine or potential jail. I've been doing this a long time, and I actually did not know this was the law. And I was told by the selective service, it's actually on their website, and this is the guidance they give to financial aid offices, that someone would have to be living under a rock to not know that this is the law in our country. I guess Oregon's kind of a rock, because I swear I watch a lot of regular TV and I see lots of military commercials. My husband watches a lot of sports, and I've never seen a commercial that says, hey, young men, when you turn 18, you need to, I've never seen that, but it is the law. And to receive any federal aid, like the Pell Grant, a student who is eligible does need to register. The selective service also says, if you really feel opposed to serving in the military, if we ever did have a draft, there are lots of ways you can object, be a conscientious objector. Clearly, we have lots of people who join the military voluntarily. We have a very robust military. We have students from here who join every year. So if you or your student have questions about this, we could talk about it at the end, or make an appointment to talk. The other thing about this, I think it's males have until the age of 26 or 28 to register for the selective service. And after that, they've missed the window. So like if someone doesn't go to school and at 30, they decide, hey, I want to be an EMT, and they go to RCC and they sign up for the program and they do a FAFSA, they get told, sorry, financially you qualify for a Pell Grant, but you never registered for the selective service, so we can't give you that money. Also, if you want to work for a federal agency like the Forest Service, or be in a, work for a US Embassy or be in the FBI, supposedly you also have to have signed up for the selective service within that window. Okay, that's enough about that. I've become the default person who gets to talk about this to students. So this is just kind of a little summary of some of the grants, and I haven't updated it for this year. So federal, like we talked about there on the left, the Pell Grant annual, last year it was $6,195. Like I told you, this year it's up to $6,495. You apply through the FAFSA. It's available for 6 years at full time. Another federal grant that students who qualify for a Pell Grant can be awarded is the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. So everyone who applies for the FAFSA and is eligible for a Pell Grant will be awarded that Pell Grant, even if they don't complete their FAFSA until March, right? It's not a pool of money that has ever run out. This Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant money does run out. So each school gets a pot of it. And so what I've seen over the last number of years is that our students are completing FAFSA earlier and earlier. They're putting their schools that they're applying to on their FAFSA. They're applying to their schools earlier so that their schools can bundle their financial aid packages earlier. And so our students are getting larger FSEOG grants and larger work study packages, because those funds are limited. So if you apply late, you're eligible for work study or FSEOG money, you might not get it. And then there's state grants, like I told you, the Oregon Opportunity Grant, the Oregon Promise Grant, and then on the side there, which I don't know if our little gallery of photos is covering it up, so I'll move it over here. I just use SOU as an example. Lots of schools have grants based on need. So like SOUs is called the Affordability Grant. So if you're Pell eligible, they will put on another grant that is need-based based on your EFC. But they also have lots of merit aid based on your academics, your GPA, your SAT scores. And then I already talked about work study, right? That's when you get to work on campus. And it is one of the questions on the FAFSA. Would you like to be considered for work study? So I always tell students to put yes, because if they give you money, but you have a great job and you don't want a job on campus, you can always say, no, I'm not going to take a work study job. And then this is just a little bit more about loans. I already talked some about them, but this is surprising for parents. Like we talked a little in the beginning before we started, like a lot of parents are really honestly shocked about the cost of state universities these days. Like people hear on the news, wow, $80,000, to go to, NYU or Harvard, but they think state schools are relatively cheap, and they are compared to private schools. But really, U of O now, if you don't qualify for a Pell Grant and your student's a good student, they have a 3.5, but they don't get merit aid of like $6,000, it's going to cost you over $30,000 a year to send your student to U of O. So another things that changed is when I went to college, when a lot of parents went to college and our teachers went to college, students could take out a lot of loans. And that's why we have a lot of parents and a lot of teachers who have huge student debt. Like it's kind of, teachers will tell their students, yeah, I have $100,000 in student debt. I will never be able to pay it off. I love being a teacher. I chunk away at it. But the federal government and society in general, I hope, does not want, students going into that much debt, right? So the maximum loan a freshman can take is $5,500. that's reasonable if $5,500 is standing in between you and going to your dream school. You know, if a parent and student decide together that $40,000 is standing in between that student and their dream school, then the parent, can, take out a loan, and schools will often put a parent plus loan into the financial aid package, or parents can, take out a mortgage on their house, or, do all sorts of things. But the federal government has changed it so that we don't end up with another generation that has outrageous student debt, which is a good thing. And I already talked about the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans. And then here's the Parent Plus loan. Sometimes they call it the Parent Direct Loan now, which they'll often bundle into the student's financial aid package. But just since we have a lot of parents here, just so you know, if you are offered that kind of loan, I've been told you should check with your bank. You should check with your accountant. There's often other loans depending on your financial resources that you might be able to take out that would be either a better interest rate or just make more financial sense for your family. And then this is just a brief slide about the CSS profile. And the CSS profile is another financial aid application that colleges, mostly private colleges, ask for in addition to the FAFSA. The CSS profile is housed under the College Board, who do the SATs and the AP tests. They ask for a lot more information than the FAFSA. So if your parents are divorced, they also want to know all about the other parents' income and assets. The FAFSA does not consider your primary residence an asset, right? So if your parents own their house, they're not going to ask you how much your parents' house costs or how much the mortgage is. The CSS profile does. So a lot more information, but a lot of parents and students kind of forget about the CSS profile when they're looking at private schools and get caught off guard when they get an email saying, hey, we got your application and your FAFSA, but we haven't gotten your CSS profile. And so parents are scrambling, the night before it's due to complete the CSS profile. It's not free unless you qualify for free and reduced lunch. So there's a charge just to fill out the CSS profile, and every time you submit it to a school, there's another charge if a student qualifies for free and reduced lunch. Just like we can give fee waivers for the SAT, ACT, the student needs to contact us and they can fill out the CSS profile without paying anything. Okay, and then just like the circle of life, the circle of financial aid repeats itself every year. Some schools, once you get in, that use the CSS profile might not require it every year. Same thing with the FAFSA. Like if you get into a school and you're not receiving any scholarships or grants based on your FAFSA, and your family's financial situation hasn't changed, they might say, no, we don't need you to submit it every year. A lot of parents say, well, I know we're not going to qualify for a Pell Grant. We're just not going to do the FAFSA. I encourage every family to do it their student's senior year and see what the colleges want and say, because some schools will not give merit aid that's not at all based on your family's finances unless they have a FAFSA on file. University of Portland is like that. The FAFSA is really easy to do. So I really encourage every student and parent to complete the FAFSA senior year. And some schools, like my daughter goes to a private school in Colorado, even though her merit scholarship, which is half of her tuition, is not based on our FAFSA, they still want it completed every year. So we have to do it, even though we're not getting any need-based aid. So it's just how that works. So I am going to stop sharing and stop this recording and then see if you all have any questions for me. Stop recording. Okay.